1974 Carla Walker was a 17-year-old junior at Western Hills High School in Fort Worth, Texas. Just 4'11", Carla had honey blonde hair that fell below her shoulders. She was dating Rodney McCoy. He was described as a wiry, good-natured kid who was the quarterback of the football team. Rodney and Carla talked about enrolling together at Texas Tech University. She told her closest friends that she had no doubt that she and Rodney would someday marry and start a family. The evening of February 16th of 1974. Rodney arrived at the Walkers' home in Benbrook in far west Fort Worth to take Carla to the school's Valentine's Day dance. When the event ended around 11:30, Rodney invited another couple to cruise Camp Bowie Boulevard and the Benbrook traffic circle with him and Carla. They stopped at a couple of teen hangouts, Mr. Quick Hamburgers and Taco Bell. After dropping off the others, Rodney and Carla drove to a nearby bowling alley, Brunswick Ridgely Bowl, where Carla used the restroom. Not long after Carla climbed in the car, the passenger door flew open. Rodney caught a glimpse of a tall man with short brown hair. He began bludgeoning Rodney over the head with the butt of a pistol. At some point, the gun's magazine clip dislodged and fell into the parking lot. The man grabbed Carla. Rodney, barely conscious, heard him say, "You're coming with me, aren't you, sweetie?" Rodney, "Go get my dad." Carla said, "Go get my dad." Rodney came to the driver's seat. Sometime around 1 a.m. he sped to the Walkers' home, which was less than a mile away. He drove up over the curb onto the front lawn and slammed on the brakes. Carla's parents, Leighton and Doris, were still awake, playing dominoes in the dining room with relatives. Carla's little brother Jim, who was 12 years old, and her elder sister Cindy, who was 18, were in the living room watching television. They heard someone banging at the front door and were stunned to see Rodney, blood dripping down his face. He was frantic. "Mr. Walker, they've got her," he shouted. "They're gonna hurt her bad." Leighton, a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel, grabbed his pistol and raced to the bowling alley. Doris dialed the operator on the family's rotary phone and asked to be connected to the police. Searching the parking lot, they found Carla's purse along with the magazine clip that had been ejected from the assailant's weapon. Other cops drove the surrounding streets in squad cars, scanning for any sign of Carla. After the sun rose, more joined the hunt, peering through binoculars. A few circled the city in helicopters. When classes resumed on Monday morning, detectives visited Western Hills High. They studied contact sheets of photos taken at the dance, looking for anyone who seemed out of place. They stopped kids in the hallways, asking if they knew anyone who would want to hurt Carla. On February 20th of 1974, 4 days after Carla's disappearance, 2 of the officers assigned to look for her were driving along a remote 2-lane road near Benbrook Lake, about 5 miles southwest of the bowling alley. They spotted a culvert and a concrete tunnel built to let water flow beneath the road and pulled over to peer inside. They saw a young woman lying on her back. Her face and neck were covered with scratches and deep bruises. It was Carla. It appeared that she had been strangled because there were no ligature marks around her neck. Investigators believed that the culprit had choked her using his hands. News of what happened to Carla covered almost the entire front page of the Star-Telegram. Her funeral, which was held at the Western Hills Church of Christ, was attended by more than 1,250 mourners, far more than the small sanctuary could hold. Fort Worth officials formed a task force of detectives from the area's police department. The group didn't have much to investigate. No fingerprints had been identified on Carla's body or clothing. The blood on her dress had come from Rodney's head wounds. Traces of bodily fluid had been found, but the technology did not yet exist to identify a person from their DNA, and in that era there were no surveillance cameras and parking lots and no license plate readers on the sides of the highways. The group did set up a 24-hour telephone tip line at the downtown police headquarters. Officers sat behind metal desks, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to citizens pass on the names of men they believed were responsible. The detectives were told by various callers that Carla's life was taken by a pair of marijuana dealers, by a carnival worker at the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo, and by a quiet young man who often bowled alone at the alley where Carla had been kidnapped. They heard stories about a boy who had supposedly gotten into an argument with Rodney at Mr. Quick Hamburgers the night before the dance. The detectives also hired a hypnotist to try to draw more details out of Rodney, who suffered a head injury during the incident, but the most significant memory he managed to recall was that Carla's kidnapper had been wearing a brown or tan cowboy hat. When the hypnotist snapped his fingers and Rodney awoke, he burst into tears. He was all torn up inside, tormented that he couldn't save his girlfriend. During one meeting, the task force detectives discussed another unsolved case that had taken place on February 7th of 1973, almost exactly a year before Carla's That night a young woman named Becky Martin did not return home after attending a night class at Tarrant County Junior College's South Campus. Her body was found almost 7 weeks later. It was so decomposed that there was no way to determine the cause. The medical examiner said Becky could have been stabbed or strangled or even shot through the stomach. What most intrigued the detectives about Becky's case was where her body had been found in a culvert just outside the city limits. The 2 girls and 2 culverts a year apart. It just seemed too coincidental for investigators. Although they said nothing publicly, the investigators began looking for a serial offender by March, a month after Carla's life was taken. All the task force had to go on was one small lead. The detectives learned that the magazine clip found in the bowling alley parking lot belonged to a newer Model 22 Ruger handgun. They asked the federal government's Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to provide them with the names of anyone living in Fort Worth who had purchased that model. The ATF came up with a list of a couple dozen people, and the task force set out to interview each one of them. One man on the list was 31-year-old truck driver named Glenn McCurley. McCurley was raised in West Texas, the eldest of 3 boys. When he was a teenager, his parents sent him to the Westviews Boys Home in southwestern Oklahoma. Westview, which is sponsored by the Churches of Christ, promotes itself as a place for those who are deprived due to sickness in their family. Boys experiencing significant problems in living with their family, boys needing supervision, and delinquent boys, those who have violated the law but who are not in need of treatment or detention, and abandoned, abused, or neglected boys. It's not clear why McCurley was sent to the home or precisely how long he was there, but his stay clearly wasn't transformative. By February of 1961, he had left Westview and was in Abilene, Texas, where he stole a car. Then he abandoned the car and stole another one. The State Highway Patrol began to pursue him and shot out one of his tires. He drove the vehicle onto a vacant lot and attempted to escape on foot, but was quickly captured in court. McCurley pleaded guilty and received a 2-year sentence. He was released early in the spring of 1962 when he was 19. He eventually moved to Midland, where he met a blonde high school student named Judy Watson. On February 16 of 1963, McCurley married Judy in a Baptist church. The young couple moved into a small rental home. McCurley eventually got a job as a truck driver for the U.S. Postal Service with a route to Dallas-Fort Worth area. Judy gave birth to 2 sons, Craig and Roddy. Then in 1972, McCurley moved his young family to a neighborhood in West Fort Worth. McCurley and Judy enrolled their boys in the public elementary school, and they joined Ridgely West Baptist Church. McCurley got another truck driving job hauling prefabricated slabs of concrete to construction sites. Judy worked at the church's daycare center. One man who knew McCurley did not a distasteful habit. He'd see a pretty girl and say something like, "Take a look at that." In early March of 1974, 2 detectives arrived at McCurley's home to interview him about his Ruger 22 pistol. When the officers asked about the gun, McCurley said that it had been stolen 6 weeks earlier from his pickup truck while he was fishing. He then agreed to come to downtown and take a polygraph test, which he passed. The task force promptly eliminated him as a potential suspect. By late spring of 1974, investigators still had little to show for their work. The task force didn't officially disband, but many of the detectives were ordered by their supervisors to return to their other cases. Strangers would occasionally call the Walkers' house, many of them anonymously claiming they had information about who ended Carla's life. Layton talked to all of them. He took notes and kept them in a metal box the size of a cigar box. He wrote down names and addresses of potential suspects, and he drew circles on maps where he had been told the culprit lived. He was not going to rest until he knew the man responsible was behind bars. When Carla's younger brother Jim turned 16 and got his driver's license, he began spending his free time helping his dad hunt for the perpetrator. Sometimes on the anniversary, he would prowl the parking lot of the Brunswick Ridgely Bowl looking for anyone suspicious. Jim took boxing lessons at the Panther Boys Club, joined the high school's wrestling and football teams, and went on long runs through his neighborhood. "I wanted to be ready in case I ever came across the culprit," Jim said. "My plan was to overpower him and take him someplace far away, maybe somewhere out in West Texas where no one can hear him scream." On February 19th of 1977, almost precisely 3 years after Carla's body was found, someone came across the body of 25-year-old June Ward, a vocational nurse, lying next to a curb in South Fort Worth. June was naked except for a bra strap wrapped around her neck. She'd been strangled and beaten over the head with what the one reporter described as a sharp, heavy object. Detectives who had worked on the Carla Walker task force couldn't help but notice the similarities between the two crimes. Then on July 9th of 1980, the body of a 19-year-old woman named Denise Hogue, described in the newspaper as an unemployed drifter, was found a few feet from a creek bridge in South Fort Worth. She too had been strangled 2.5 years later. In February of 1983, the body of Christy Tower, a waitress at the family Billy Bob's Texas nightclub in the Stockyards, was discovered in a field north of the city. Her hands were bound with electrical wire and another wire was twisted around her neck. Like the other crimes, Christy's case remained a mystery, though a few days after her body was found, detectives received a curious bit of news. They learned that Christie's purse had been found in a dumpster behind Cheers, a bar on Champ Bowie Boulevard. Cheers was only a half a mile from the Brunswick Ridgely bowling parking lot, the place where Carla had been kidnapped in February of 1974. Residents were getting more worried about the prospect of a serial offender. Such concerns grew when Catherine Davis, a 23-year-old aspiring model, went missing on September 9th of 1984. Her body was found in a field in far South Fort Worth. About a month later, on October 19th, Marilyn Hartman, a 25-year-old middle school teacher, was found gagged and strangled in her Fort Worth bedroom. Just 3 days after that, Cindy Heller, a 23-year-old Texas Christian University graduate and former beauty contestant, disappeared after last being seen near Hullen Mall. She was later found strangled in a creek bed on the Texas Christian University campus. The tragedies kept piling up. On November 26 of 1984, Catherine Jackson, another local middle school teacher, was found naked in her bathtub with the water still running. She had been strangled with a cord 2 weeks after that. Angela E. Were, a 21-year-old part-time model and programmer for an FM rock station, left her fiancé's house in southwest Fort Worth the following day. Her car was found abandoned by a highway in a southern part of the city, and her decomposed remains were eventually discovered in a field north of Fort Worth on the evening of December 22nd, just days before Christmas. 21-year-old Regina Grover was seen with her boyfriend walking out of the Kega restaurant on Camp Bowie. She was found the next day strangled and drowned in a creek under a bridge in North Fort Worth. Her boyfriend, who was found in his bed at his apartment, had been fatally bludgeoned. Fort Worth women, especially those living in the southwestern part of the city, were panicking. Local media reported on skyrocketing gun and mace sales when the police department offered a free seminar on self-defense. More than 3,000 attended, most of them women. The police department formed another task force. We're going to break this thing. Police Chief H.F. Hopkins promised. Detectives questioned every suspect, from ex-cons with long rap sheets to a freelance photographer. The investigation, though, was fruitless. The only welcome news was a lull in crimes. The culprit, if it was one culprit, seemed to have retreated. That was until February 24th of 1986. A passerby came across a woman's unclothed body partially wrapped in a blanket lying on a hillside near a park in central Fort Worth. She had been strangled, but the police could not identify her through the usual means, fingerprints or dental records, nor did they receive any reports about a missing woman that might have provided a clue. Another year passed, and then another, and this time it really did appear as if the unknown man committing all these crimes had retreated for good. Carla Walker's little brother Jim had not given up after graduating from Western Hills High. Jim had attended Sam Houston State University, where he read books on serial offenders and took courses in abnormal psychology so that he could better understand what he described as the criminal mind. After he graduated from college, he moved back to Fort Worth and applied to become an officer with the city's police department. His plan was to get promoted to detective and get his hands on Carla's files and find the man responsible. During a training session at the academy's firing range, however, Jim noticed something was wrong with his eyesight. Doctor later diagnosed him with a congenital eye condition. Forced to drop out of the academy, he went to work in